We had so much fun with Sameer that we had to do a part two. Let's dive into delivering tough news, improving marketing analytics and dashboarding from a practical perspective, and addressing some hot topics amongst industry insiders around issues and opportunities to improve online and programmatic media. From all of us at Branching Out, thank you guys for listening and looking forward to talking to you in 2026. Thanks.
Welcome to Branching Out by Bonsai, the podcast where marketing gets measured, myths get busted, and acronyms get explained. No filler, just the good stuff. Let's get into it.
A traditional TV sales team would not be supportive. And actually, they've been incredible.
Awesome.
And the way it's played out, the bit where they got nervous, the first time you're doing a debrief with some bracing news.
Yeah.
But can we make it look a bit better? Well, no, it was what it was. You know, we've
what it was.
thought about the methodologies, done our homework, we've done all the checks, we've consulted Twyman's law. Now we have to give you this debrief and have this conversation, and we've thought about what to do next and so on. And every time it plays out, well, I mean, I'm always slightly nervous because I want to help them, but this is me helping them. And we'll go to the meeting, we'll go through all of it, and then there'll be this pause as the marketer digests. And he goes, okay, so what are we going to do next? We're going to do this, and we're going to try this. And then there's this sort of sense of relief from the salesperson. Like, oh, that was like really bracing news. And yet they're not saying TV is henceforth cast into the outer darkness. You know, I never want to see you again. They're saying, okay, let's work to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just such a lovely feeling because it means that we've done our job in terms, there's always a degree of suspicion. Well, you're from the TV, you're from the broadcaster. Of course, you're going to say it was good.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of work with the methodologies, with all of the stuff, just like you do, to really be careful. And then when you get to those sorts of conversations, it's just lovely. And it's that, in a weird way, it's a bit like, I mean, when I was working in agencies, although increasingly the incentives are more nuanced and complicated, at the time, it was very much, the client's paying you to do stuff, you do stuff to make their business better.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something refreshingly simple about that.
Mm-hmm.
It is, oh, I work for you. Okay, good. Let me try and help you then. And that's, you talk about being in better business rather than with marketing. I think that's exactly the right spirit. And where you see it particularly, I think, at the moment, is these sorts of small, medium-sized businesses who are trying to grow from nothing. And they go on that sort of typical journey of, okay, we'll start with Meta, we'll grow as much as we can, we'll use images from the catalog or the site or whatever. And then, this YouTube thing, that's a bit scary. We've got to have moving images now. How do we do that? Oh, okay. Other achievement unlocked.
Yeah.
And then we come a bit later in that journey. And I would say to an advertiser like this, yeah, we've run some tests on your creative. Honestly, we don't think you should give us any money right now. Go back to YouTube, go back to the nursery slopes, and keep going until you've got better communication, because at the moment you'd be wasting your time and money. And that the counterintuitive joy of someone at ITV saying, yeah, go and do it on YouTube, I just like, because it's another way of underlining our credibility, but also it means that by the time they come back to us, they're in a better position. And
Yeah, you're not going to get great studies from bad advertisers on your platform.
No.
It's just the reality. So to put our kind of incentives hat on, right? It's like, yeah, you need them to do a good job, and it doesn't help you. Great, we got this business that's not ready for this. We got the contract, but they're not going to be back. Or this, we can't put this on the website. Like, you're in the business of telling these great stories, and yeah, that's exactly the right way to do it. I think it's okay to say out loud the sort of universal truth that we do agree. We want marketers to have more resources. We want them to get bigger budgets, to be more important, to have better say. They're critical to growth. They define growth in almost every place. And so they are underfunded. They are underrepresented. You way more often see problems because there wasn't enough good marketing, not because they did too much bad marketing. And so in that world, it's like, we're team marketer. We're here to get you the bigger budget. I think it's fair to say there's so much effort and so many smart people are devoted to then trying to, okay, we know getting the win was great. Let's use it to get more marketing to grow this business further. And, finance historically gave 10% of the company's revenue to marketing. If we tell this great story, they're going to give us 13% or 15%, or they're going to grow it. And yes, That's a good remit, and it should continue to some degree. But it misses another opportunity, which is if whether or not the finance guy believes you, if you've moved the business forward and the business is bigger, guess what? You've got a bigger marketing budget because 10% of a bigger company is more money. So it's just sort of like being okay with that too, of yes, let's tell great stories, but also let's move the needle and then let's do both. And guess what? Telling the truth is also team marketing. It hasn't always been dressed up that way. And the emphasis is more on that side of it and maybe less on advocacy side of it. So yeah, I don't know. I love what you're doing. Either one marketing metric or marketing type or measurement type. Like what's something that people are obsessing over right now that is absolutely not useful?
I was thinking about this one. It's a weird, there are so many candidates to choose from in a way, but then it slightly takes us back into that, oh, they're using the wrong metric. And if they use this other one, I'm going to go for a kind of meta bad habit. And this will sound odd, but a lot of the orthodoxy and the training is exactly what you say, which is focus on one metric. And yet there are lots of reasons in organizations, whether you think about the psychology of organizations or you think about the way that people game metrics once they've got them, the ways that most metrics have flaws in them, actually looking at a basket of measures, I would argue, is a better way to do it. And yet all the training materials will say to you, no, no, no. And partly this is a sort of drawdown from the statistics, which will say, well, you can't shop around for results after the fact. And there is a bad strain of that where, okay, this was meant to improve awareness, but instead it improved perception. So we'll say that that's what we were going to do all along, because at least something went up. And that I totally get is bad. And that's a bad reason to use multiple metrics because you're, in the stats terms, you're sort of changing your hypotheses or whatever. But at the same time, what we've found with what we're doing is, even something as simple as a good quality modern regional test or geo experiment. When you do that, if you do it multi-outcome, so you say, okay, let's get the footfall numbers. Let's get the web visits. Let's get the sales value. Let's go and pay for an upweight to the brand tracking survey and even get a measure of awareness that is robust down to region level. DMA in your world or kind of, county or thereabout, TV region in ours. And when you do that, you get a really lovely chart, which is, okay, here is a lift in all of these things, most of which are things that your finance colleague really cares about too and understands the value of. And at that point, it's just much less of a worry because you're not sort of stressing about this metric or that metric. You're looking for a broader impact.
Oh, this campaign's meant to drive intent. And it's so funny because, again, we're talking about influencing customers in a market. These are these dynamic things. Isn't it amazingly arrogant to think how we know something's going to specifically affect that dynamic, right? It's like, okay, yeah, but maybe the ad generates more interest and awareness. Maybe it drives people. Maybe there's a reason that's moved the needle on, purchase decision. Maybe it's done all these other things. So how many missed opportunities have been there because a strategy has worked looking at the basket of hey, the goal here for everything is grow the business. Let's just stop it there. Here are things that we know need to happen. And if it's working, right, across either all of them or a basket, that's amazing. That can be all you need to evolve and utilize this in your strategy. But if we have this we've predetermined how we think this is going to work and it's going to be in this way and we didn't see it, it's well, not only is that presupposing a lot of things that you have no idea that that's how it's really going to work, but probably on a practical side, the worst thing is that, God forbid, it actually works, and then you thought it didn't because it didn't work in the way you want it.
Yeah, and it's that sort of folk theory that people have in their heads that they think they have a good theory of growth, and actually they may very well not. I suppose the other one I would add as a sort of meta observation about the handling of metrics is people ignoring the negatives. And so what I mean by that, there are bits where, and I mean this more specifically than kind of generic, oh, you should learn from failure. But I suspect that when a new business comes to Bonsai and engages with you, I would guess that a lot of the early wins come from you identifying and triaging things that are just bad, things that are actively a waste of money and that you shouldn't be doing. And some of that comes from excluding talking to existing customers or whatever. There's lots of tactical ways that plays out. But quite often, just not doing dumb things can get you a long way. And yet, we're sort of chasing the lift and the positivity. Let's just get the house in order first. And within that, that's not easy to do, because within that, you've then got to take advantage of the current set of technologies. And that's where that's where the humans can sometimes get in the way. I remember years ago, this chap at Mindshare, Tim, he had a side hustle, a business selling water bottles, and he's done really well now. It's now his full-time job, and it's a really well-known brand in the UK. And I remember going up to Tim and saying, "So Tim, you use these platform products for your side hustle as well as for your day job. What's the difference?" And this is, bear in mind, this is a good 10 years ago. And he said, "Well, it's funny, Sameer. When I'm doing it for my own stuff, I turn on every bit of automation I can, because it turns out those automations are really quite good. And so I make a lot more money. Whereas in my day job, I'm having to argue over every keyword or every box that I tick for an additional audience or subtracting an audience. And everyone thinks they know, and they think they know which words they should be going after. And they think they know what they should be selecting. And they think that Google's ripping them off, and therefore that they have to carefully choose every single one. And they just end up causing themselves more trouble. Whereas I just flick it all to auto, and it's really good. And there's this bit where it's back to the crawling out of the bottom of the funnel. It's this, the machines are now, there's lots of hand wringing at the moment about, oh, they'll never be creative like me, and I'm a human and I'm amazing. I'm like, yes, sure, in some ways, but there are some things that humans are really bad at. And weirdly, judging risk is one of them. That's why we're all scared when we read the newspapers.
Bad for data people, by the way. It turns out people are really terrible with percentages. But that's a separate, we will not talk about that today. But yeah, so bad with risk, bad with percentages. Gosh, well, you want my take on automation and how to, so here, I'll give you the shortest answer, which is, for me, it's people don't, an automation algorithm formula, whatever, all that stuff. If your problem is to solve a million little decisions, you want an automation. If you've got other problems, like make one big giant decision, please, please have a person do it. That's it. Like, that's my biggest point of view. I think most keyword or this, whatever, that people don't, because we don't train, like the orthodoxy isn't what I would call like tech first, in the sense, or even these systems, how does this thing even work? It's not intuitive. It's not, I can tell you how a billboard works, and none of us need an explanation. It's up in the air, something's on it. That's the end of the billboard. Digital systems are just very different. And I just think people in general, long-term lack of awareness. A system, not what you think it is. It's not like this one decision or that one decision. This is simply a system that has billions of little decisions going on all the time. You never need to get that right of an answer at any one point, but if you can be slightly more right than you're wrong over a broad period, you're going to be wowed by what happens. But that's not how we explain it. That's not how it kind of stuns us. What do you mean? What do I do with all of these practices I've learned based on making these big decisions? And that's, don't worry about them. They're not what you think. There are things you need to go do, and they're very different things. And I'm not saying there's work to do, but the work itself is very different. And that's how I see all these systems, frankly.
Yeah, that's it. Because it's you do see these, on LinkedIn, I'll see these sorts of search performance who will just be really angry all the time. I mean, it must be exhausting. They're angry about everything that Meta or Google do. Oh, they've done this in PMax, and oh, they've done this, and oh, they're hiding my visibility. They're taking away visibility of my campaigns. But they're all based on these folk theories that are
probably wrong.
And rather than worrying about all that minutiae, and I get it. To some extent, that's what pays their mortgage and that focuses the mind. And so you want to defend the way that things were. I remember years ago, I was on the global search team at Mindshare. So, you can see where this is going, right? Because it's going to be focused on intent. And actually, intent can be expressed through many words. And you look at what Meta have done, and they don't make you words for interests. They just bring it up to the level of interests, because machine learning is a good thing. And so, you can see a path to Google doing the same thing. And he looked at me and he just went completely pale. And he said, "But that's what pays my mortgage."
Yeah, but what do I do? To your point about the enthusiasts and, the hand-wringing and like the energy put against this. I find ironic, though, is that the systems they're criticizing, the automations and all that stuff they're criticizing, By the way, these tools are not above reproach and deserve a lot of criticism. These are the wrong, I find it like so sad that these are the wrong, there's a lot of things wrong with, I don't know how much you want to get into specific examples. I know that Meta's got ASC and, Google's got PMax and there's other examples, but yeah, these ad platforms are out there a lot of times trying to monetize automations, running auction media on impressions that have no auction. Good luck. Good luck growing your revenue there. Good luck making that a good user experience. I'm not even sure the people there even completely understand what they've built and why there's ways to improve upon it, right? There are absolutely real criticisms with how to make these things better, but it took my toy away, but I thought about this, but I want to do that. It's honestly, you're making the argument worse because you're kind of missing the underlying truth of that. These things are database systems that require millions of little decisions, not one big one. All right. So I know you're prepped with a whiteboard. I don't know if we'll use it today. I do want to ask you, okay, so we've asked what's wrong with some of these things in the industry. Maybe let's take the other direction. It could be ITV, it could be whatever. You're building the dream marketing analytics tool or dashboard for 2030, right? What's on it? What are you putting on that? What are you taking off of what is on today? And what are you putting on that tool and why?
Okay, so maybe start with a general dashboarding principle, which in a way comes back to the sort of true but dull and false but interesting map, if you like, or 2x2, is that, and I know you think about this a lot, just putting some numbers onto a screen in a graph does not make it a dashboard. The dashboard in your car is there for some very specific reasons, largely to stop you dying. And so it has evolved over time, along with the control surfaces of the car, to encourage, continued life. And so knowing how fast you go is a really important thing. Yeah. And knowing the revs of the engine when you had engines was a thing that you might need to know about because you could damage your car. Those are two good things to know. There's a bunch of other stuff that is explicitly not there. It is not wired in. It is not showing up. So just saying, well, I've put some numbers here in a thing, that makes it a dashboard. Well, no, it doesn't, because in a way, the theme of what we've been talking about is you need to have an underlying theory of what does and doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And without that, it is just some numbers. But numbers plus a theory can start to get you to some sense of what you should be focusing on and what matters. So I suppose I'd have that as a kind of general point of it. Designing a dashboard, not so much about the look and feel of it. And yes, you can worry about your car dashboard and do I do miles per hour or kilometers per hour? Do I do both? Do I have a illuminated needle or not? Sure, go for your life. Do all of that if you want. But just think, first of all, what is the equivalent of speed in this context? And speed is a derived measure. It's a derivative. It's a function of change of something over time. And so then where you get to is what are the models, I think, that sit under the dashboards? And that's the interesting bit, is what have you modeled away because of your theory or your kind of understanding of what things matter, to remove all the noise, remove the bits that you can't do anything about, and leave you with some clarity. So people talk a lot about data-driven marketing, and I absolutely hate that phrase.
Amen. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Just reminding people, data doesn't make decisions. People do.
Yes. And it's so important. If it was that easy and if the numbers could tell you what to do, then why do you have a job? It doesn't make any sense. Now, model-supported conversation, if I cube the model, then the model has done the work of stripping out all of the noise and the stuff that I don't need to know and focuses on the relationships that matter. And by cubing that, I can explore that space, which is a better space to explore because I'm less likely to do something silly or wrong because I'm looking at some raw numbers, and that I think is quite a wise. So in a way, the dashboard is a consequence of the learning and the modeling that you've done rather than the place to start. That's a lovely pattern because it crops up in lots of places. Strategists have said since time immemorial, which is, would anybody say the opposite? If they wouldn't say the opposite, then you are not making a choice. If you wouldn't say that I'm a numbers-free marketer, then you haven't said anything.
Yeah.
And it's that test, actually quite a good test.
Yeah, I love that test. I love the dashboard idea. Yeah. I think what's resonating to me about that as a model is, yes, the car, the dashboard, it's here. What is the goal? Well, the goal is to get in the car, get where I'm going
Yeah.
without dying, right? If I've gotten to where I need to go and I haven't died, I've succeeded. And I think that is, as the business marketing, whatever we're talking about, that dashboard, we're just trying to achieve our business objective without going out of business. If what you have on that is helping us get to those aims, it's probably fine. It's probably great.
And it doesn't mean it's easy. Work that you're doing is that it's, to have a successful readout of speed, having decided that you think speed is an important thing.
Yeah.
Then have to have something a machine that can essentially differentiate. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to think about, what sort of time windows is it differentiating over? And, how will it behave in the different failure modes that exist? What will it do when one of the car's wheels is off the ground? Or, all of that thought has gone into kind of safety engineering in cars over decades. Mm-hmm. And yet in the marketing world, it feels like we're still floundering around with people walking in front of the cars with flags, mm-hmm. rather than thinking, because there's so much of this stuff has not been visible and not been measurable, which I guess gets you. I will actually now try and answer your question. So what I'm trying to get to for telly is three related things. The first thing I want is a more kinetic measure, let's call it real time, why not, of ratings of the audiences. And that's not because I think that audience first thinking is the right way to go. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is another counterintuitive thing in digital marketing is, these days you will have people start on Meta and they start with completely open targeting. They come with no prejudices at all. And they simply plug in the outcome variable, whatever it is, the API, and they say, right, go forth, Meta, Google, TikTok, and find what works, and then come back and tell me when you have. I am not going to kind of hamstring you by giving you my prejudices about audience. So there's a whole sort of, there's a way in which kind of audience first thinking can limit you, because we forget that an audience was only ever a hypothesis. It was just a hypothesis about what might work better than talking to everybody with a pulse, and you might have been right and you might not. So I know it's weird, but my first thing would be a real-time measure of audience, partly because this flips the analogy now. By putting a different thing on the dashboard, I make the engineers have to do something different behind the scenes. This is a bit weird for people who don't have a background in TV measurement. Maybe if I just do a layup first.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about how the audience measurement system was the thing that we invested in.
Yes.
And because this was a contested set of numbers between buyers and sellers, and the buyers don't want to get ripped off and the sellers want to get fair amounts of money, there was a lot of pressure on the measurement geeks in the middle from both sides. And they were told, in no uncertain terms, you have to make it accurate and it has to be reliable and dependable and transparent and all these good things that we're supposed to want, like motherhood and apple pie. And so they felt this pressure for many, many years, for decades, really. And so we now have a world where we have these incredibly expensive panels, where we have some really complicated weighting processes on top of those, and some algorithms that are not always designed actually to be spot on, but to be consistent, because what you don't want for a currency number is for it to be one thing on a Monday and another thing on a Tuesday. That's not good. Currency fluctuation is bad. And so we've ended up in this world where their value system is about the quality of measurement. But in the meantime, what's happening is the tail of the distribution of viewing is becoming bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. And there are fewer and fewer things that a panel-based system can actually measure. Mm-hmm. And so you have this debate. There was a conference called ASI, which happened in Copenhagen this year. And there was an awful lot of hand-wringing in this audience with people saying, audience measurement has to be about beautiful, high-quality, stratified sampling panels with amazing weighting layers on top derived from an establishment survey that's also very expensive, because it has to be right. We have to count correctly. And don't be coming at me with any of that dirty, large-scale device-based data, because that's just impressions. It's not people. And how dare you? My panel is beautiful and made by unicorns. And that is honestly the subtext version of the debate that is happening.
Yeah.
And yet you or I would look at that and go, well, hang on a minute. At some point, I've already got like 7 screens in this room. Yeah. We're going to get to a point where we can't do it that way, either in terms of the devices or in terms of the viewing patterns and so on. So the reason for me saying my first block of my 3-block dashboard is real-time audience measurement, because what that does is it immediately changes the brief to the engineers, because what they have to do is then think, okay, right, I need to do something different. I need all of those tellies, and I need all of them to phone home and tell me what they're watching. And then I need some sort of machine learning model on top of that that makes a reasonable prediction of what my fancy schmancy audience measurement panel thing will tell me a week later. Because I know, dear listeners, I know it seems incredible, but people wait weeks, if not months, for some of their TV reporting to come through.
Oh, yeah.
And for a digital marketer, that's just like, you what?
In the US, we wait 5 days for our checks to clear. So
All so ridiculous. So we've got these very delayed measures. So by saying my first block is real-time audience reporting,
yep.
is that because I really care about the audiences in a future where we're buying on outcomes? No, but there's a transition that this industry has to go through. And by valorizing a real-time, let's go back to speed.
I love it. It's, what you're reminding me of is this thing I loved learning at the talk that I heard it at. You talked about how you get people doing the right things through change management. And you talked about this idea of familiar but different. And you're talking audience right now as block one.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, well, audience is familiar.
Yes.
So we're going to get to where we need to get to on outcomes, but I'll help you get started with something we both understand, which is this. Is the way I'm hearing your explanation of that establishment system is, historically, or I guess now, we still have these incredible tools that can answer a question with a ton of precision. That's just completely the wrong question now. And as you're talking about real time or the proliferation of all this stuff, the question is just very different. Maybe precision on all this stuff isn't really the key, but a much more interesting question needs to be asked, which is how do we get our hands around this very complicated, bifurcated attention economy and audience economy? How do we get people something useful fast?
No, that's a lovely way to think about it. I hadn't thought about it like that. It is bringing people with us towards the right-hand bit of imagined dashboard, but giving them something that's exactly that, familiar but different. So this is the audience stuff that you know and love. These are the kind of the weird, blocky buying audiences. There's a whole other thing there. So the second block is I want this to be something that is near real-time lift. And that's all chosen quite carefully, again, to influence the engineering behind it. So it's like I'm sketching the ideal dashboard. So the first thing I want to know is how fast I'm going. And I want to know how fast I'm going now, not last week. So that would be good. So the second thing is that I want some sort of real-time lift. And so the easiest way of thinking about this is if I've got millions of TVs that are sending me data on their viewing, and I can also match. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's 2025. IP matching still works. Should it? No, but it does. And I can do some sort of lift measurement against that. Pretty crude, but I don't want to do attribution, kind of straight attribution. So I'll have some kind of control group in there. And I can do real-time or near real-time lift to web traffic. So the second thing you get as an advertiser is you can, and because I've done this on the same system, the cute thing is I can split that by the same audiences. So if you are the marketer that happens to believe that you are really doing audience targeting when you buy TV, spoiler alert, you're not, then you can look at it that way. And what it will teach people over time is they'll go, oh, right. So I can click the drop down for 16 to 34s because that's what that campaign was bought against. But there's all these 55 pluses, but they seem to be doing something. I thought I wasn't targeting them. Wait, oh no, I get them for free because it's telly. And actually the lift is about the same. Maybe I need to think about my audience thinking. Maybe I'm wrong. Audience is a hypothesis, right?
Expanding,
so you've got
audience is who I am, tells you a lot about my intent, but that's not the only thing that tells you about my intent. There's other things, right?
So that's the second block. And you could stop there. You could say, okay, we've done enough. We've inflicted a lot of change on this industry. Let's just leave it there. But no, there's a third bit that we want. And this is where I do actually think some kind of hybrid measurement is useful. The thing that we're building is this thing called Lantern. And part of Lantern is a sort of real-timey bit with tags and stuff that we all understand. It's quite straightforward, really. But the bit that has surprised people is that we also are investing in a panel, but it's not an audience panel. It's not, come into the room and tell us that you're in the room so that we can record that you're watching TV. It's an online behavioral panel. So it's essentially a way of gathering up all of the behaviors that you're doing with full consent and paying you for the privilege at a decent scale. And it turns out that, 30 years ago, There used to be this panel in the US called Compete, I think, and it died a death. I was a real fan of it, but it was far too expensive. But these days, because everything I do is recorded in a login somewhere, it's actually really cheap as a research exercise to get people to share that data with you. So, we'll get to a panel of about 15,000 people, which is twice the size of
very big panel.
And I have a theory that one of the things that we're trying to do is there's this kind of market failure in panels, behavioral panels, where everyone's got like a 5K panel. I'm like, I don't want that. The stats don't behave themselves at 5,000 people. It's no good to me. But you've got one, and you've got one, and you've got one. If only there was one panel with 15, that'd be amazing. So we hope that we're going to bootstrap some sort of development in this world where people will get people over this kind of death valley of panel size, and then they'll start to grow because other use cases become tractable.
Yeah.
But no, I'm going to get to the end. The third bit is where we have a kind of hybrid where we say, okay, the tag gives us the short-term spikes, but we already know that the short-term spikes aren't enough for TV. However, if we have this panel as well, and we have all of their behaviors online, the Amazon purchases, the searches, whatever it is, and if we can categorize those with, magic of machine learning into buckets per brand, then we get a kind of a very rich outcome signal, and we get it over a sustained period of time. But crucially, weeks and maybe a month or two, but within quarter. I'm not talking about, years down the line, just tell your finance person to do a DCF and it'll all be fine. This is just near-term outcomes. And by having what we've shown with the pilot is that you can actually make that work cost effectively. So in the old days, it used to be called a single source panel, and they were incredibly expensive because you had to pay them to do a diary or scan all of their purchases that they brought home, and you had to pay for all the TV measurement kit. Now we don't have to pay for either of those things because the TV knows what you're watching and your phone knows what you're buying.
I'll skip to my punchline here is I have no problem with panels, by the way. I'm on board with panels. I think the only thing the panel can never account for is it can never control for people who will agree to do a panel. But other than that, it's great.
Yeah.
As long as that's not a big deal. And then honestly, like as you mentioned, like what has basically happened is it's not this big life decision to join a panel anymore. And so
that's exactly it.
It's right.
Yeah.
And so you can use it broadly.
Yeah. So the third block of the dashboard is then something which is running a model behind the scenes, which is taking your short-term lifts and projecting those out. But crucially, it's projecting them out on a really robust model. So this is the bit where I suppose if I have a complaint about the platforms, it's not at what they've done and built. The prediction models inside YouTube or TikTok or whatever are some of the glories of planet scale data science. They are amazing accomplishments to de-risk the media revenue equation to the point where you can allow people to buy an outcome rather than buying an eyeball. That's really hard. And it's tremendous that these machines have managed to do that.
Absolutely.
But poking those models when I was there, this is pre-LLM, right? Those models knew lots. The model that does the prediction of ad completion in YouTube knows more than every human put together has ever known about the relationship between media content and audience, because it has to. That's its job. And yet we never get a chance to ask the model. It's like there being an equivalent of ChatGPT. Let's call it a large outcome model, but you can only ever access the model indirectly. So you can't give it a prompt yourself. You can only access it by putting money in the slot to keep buying media impressions or media outcomes. And that I don't think is right, because the alternative, if you're a single advertiser, and the best at this in terms of extracting the most value from a single advertiser's data, but you, certainly for TV type stuff, you just don't have enough training data, if you want to think of it that way. You can't, an MMM is dumb as a bag of rocks, and it has very little brain capacity for learning. And that's just as well because you're only giving it a little bit of data to learn anyway. So you can't learn much as a marketer on your own these days, I think, for some channels. And to do the learning, you have to learn collectively. And so the lovely thing about this data set that we're now building is that we've got clean data for, at the moment, probably about 600 brands where it's robust. And so we can build a model across all 600 brands, which has got a lot more life experience. It's dealt with small brands, it's dealt with large brands, it's dealt with different outcome signals. And so suddenly that model, is it going to be as good as the platform models? No, because it can't predict at impression level. But what it can do is say, given everything I know, and given what I'm seeing right now, I am going to give you a sense of what sort of near-term value we are creating. So that brings us right back to the beginning.
We can interrogate these models. can't ask them questions, but if we could, it'd be so powerful, right?
Wouldn't it be amazing?
So an advertiser is one way to benefit, but think about your example on the viewers, ad completion and viewing insights, right? Because it's like, can you imagine how much better the open internet would be? All of click spam would go away, because what is click spam? It's an ad network trying to charge for an outcome that behind the scenes, it doesn't actually know what's going to cause a click. The only thing it can do is say, well, we know what's click spam. We know what we can trick anyone into doing. And here's our 5 tricks of the month, and it's the belly fat one and this one. So imagine the insight of like, hey, YouTube doesn't have to share its full secret sauce, but if it could say, we're going to democratize, here's how content affects outcome. Or if we could modularize these and be more transparent with it, my God, that might clean up a lot of
It'd
the
be amazing,
problems.
wouldn't it? But there's no way of. In fact, I'd be interested to know what you think about that, because there's that whole sort of open internet, open web thing. Is there any hope, or is it just going to continue to be the weirdest sort of Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, I think everyone I know who's passionate about it, I think we know similar people who are like the most passionate about it. I think all the main narratives around what needs to change and why, I think are all true. I think I personally don't care as much about updating, say, legislation or pursuing kind of the legal and ethical side of it. Because for me, what I would challenge anyone is like, you could bring me all of your, the worst cases or the biggest frauds or, gaming the auction markets or, all these things that are probably going on and probably all true and probably all bad. In totality, as bad as that is, it pales in comparison to the systems when working don't work. If open internet advertising was meaningfully effective, the best way to monetize it wouldn't be fraudulent strategies, right? And so I think by and large, there's just not an honest conversation about that, which is that when this thing is working at full steam and the best capacity, it's not effective. And so what do we do about that? And by the way, it's not but that's not, I mean, first of all, not everyone. People who care probably want to fight me on those concepts and whatever. I truly don't care about, I have no dog in this fight. I would much rather an open, broader set of companies succeed than a few big ones. But other than that, it's not about that. It's not about picking favorites. I'm just saying that when you look at these things, what you'll find is the reason why nefarious strategies take over is when there's an underlying issue with some sort of system that isn't working. And I think that would be worth discovering. I think it would be fair. I don't know what I would do to fix it. I don't care enough to solve it. The only proposition I would have is maybe I could conceive of a way to generate, there's a driver's test for drivers, right? Maybe there should be legislation to say you can't run an advertising network unless you can prove that you can predict things. And we have independent tests. And if you can't prove on independent tests, then maybe you're not allowed to run CPV or CPC, or maybe you're just not deemed eligible to run an outcomes-based platform because frankly, you don't have a way to do it. And I have no idea what that would look like, but maybe that's one idea, right? But to me, that's better than just trying to throw lawsuits at it or essentially dragging it into the bigger questions around what's fair and right. Good questions, but I feel like a lot of people are spinning their wheels and not going to get very far.
And it's too late. All of those things were bad, but they happened. And, Google Eric Seifert talks about how it's less than 10% now for them, at which point you go, whatever, we've got other things to worry about. Let's just get rid of it. It's such a headache and it costs us about that much in lawyers. So there was something that Olivia Corey said that I thought was really interesting. She talked about auditing, and maybe you see this as well. She talked about auditing campaigns from different advertisers as they come in to sort of set up for measurement. And her observation was there was a very clear kind of bright line in that those advertisers that had some sort of classical agency involvement, they all had some kind of open web programmatic on the plan. And none of the advertisers that were running their stuff in-house did.
Yeah.
And that really made me wonder, hence the sort of slightly glib Ponzi scheme comment, is really all that's happening here is it's a way of laundering money through an ecosystem that isn't doing anything for advertisers, but is a way that admittedly cash-strapped agencies in difficult positions can make a bit of money back somehow.
And the argument against that hypothesis would be, well, it's the systems created a situation where a time-bound in-house business that has limited resources, unfortunately, this is now such a small thing that universally have the ability to shave off that, not just money, but time to care about that because these things have gotten too big. And, Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have an answer. I do not know which is right. I love the question. What advice would someone who's either joining your team or joining this industry, or, think back to like why you got into this in the first place. Like there's people who are in similar positions, right? They're deciding on their career, or they go into academics, or do they go into industry? Any advice for them?
I would say that the technical stuff more and more these days is learnable, but there's a way in which, for example, sociologists grapple with quantitative material. And my observation would be that people on my team, those are a glimpse of that way into quantitative disciplines, even economists as well, although that's kind of more obvious. I think coming in those paths rather than the pure comp sci, unless you're interested a bit in how marketing relates to people. Marketing is a weird thing. So I pay more for this paracetamol rather than that paracetamol because it's got a different picture on the front. Not only that, but it works better for me and I feel better about it. So there is a value exchange. I'm not just being ripped off. That is weird. And being interested in that bit of human behavior, I think, is quite important. And it is learnable. Those are the things that make us human.
Thank you, Sameer.
Thank you.